Russian researchers in the late 1940s kept 5 people awake for 15 days using an experimental gas-based stimulant. They were kept in a sealed environment to carefully monitor oxygen intake so the gas didn't kill them. Since it was toxic in high concentrations, this was before closed circuit cameras, so they had only microphones and 5-inch thick glass porthole-sized windows into the chamber to monitor them. The chamber was stocked with books and coats to sleep on, and no bedding, as well as running water, toilet, and enough dried food to last all 5 for over a month. Test subjects were political prisoners, deemed enemies of the state during World War II. Everything was fine for the first 5 days. The subjects hardly complained, for having been promised falsely they would be freed if they were submitted to the test and did not sleep for 30 days. Conversations and activities were monitored, and it was noted that they continued talking about increasingly traumatic incidents in their past. The general tone of their conversations took a darker aspect after the 4-day mark. After 5 days, they started to complain about the circumstances and events that led them to where they were, and started to demonstrate severe paranoia. They stopped talking to each other and began alternately whispering into the microphones and one-way mirror portholes. Oddly, they all seemed to think that they could win the trust of the experimenters by turning over their comrades, the other subjects, in captivity with them. At first, the researchers suspected that this was an effect of the gas itself. After 9 days, the first of them started screaming. He ran the length of the chamber repeatedly, yelling at the top of his lungs for 3 hours straight, at which point he continued attempting to scream, but was only able to produce occasional squeaks. The researchers post-stated that he had physically torn his vocal cords. The most surprising thing about this behavior was how the other captives reacted to it, or rather, didn't react to it. He continued whispering into the microphones until the second of the captives started screaming. The 2 non-screaming captives took books apart, smeared page after page with their own feces, and pasted them calmly over the glass portholes. The screaming promptly stopped. So did the whispering into the microphones. After 3 more days passed, the researchers checked the microphones hourly to make sure they were working, since they thought it was impossible that no sound could be occurring with 5 people inside. The oxygen consumption in the chamber indicated that all 5 must still be alive. In fact, it was the amount of oxygen 5 people would consume at a heavy level, strenuous exercise. On the morning of the 14th day, the researchers did something they said they would not get a reaction from the captives. They used the intercom inside the chamber, hoping to provoke any response from the people. From the people they were afraid were either dead or vegetables. They announced, "We're opening the chamber to test the microphones. Step away from the door and lie flat on the floor, or you will be shot. Compliance will earn one of you your immediate freedom." To their surprise, they heard a calm voice respond in a single phrase, "We no longer want to be freed." Debate broke out among the researchers and the military forces funding the research. Unable to provoke any more response using the intercom, they finally decided to open the chamber at midnight on the 15th day. The chamber was flushed of stimulant gas and filled with fresh air, and immediately, voices from the microbes began to object. 3 different voices began begging, as if pleading for the life of their loved ones, to turn the gas back on. The chamber was open and soldiers were sent in to retrieve the test subjects. They began to scream louder than ever, and so did the soldiers when they saw what was inside. 4 of the 5 subjects were still alive, although no one could rightly call the state that any of them in life. The food rations past day 5 had not been so much as been touched. There were chunks of meat from the dead tested subjects' thighs and chests stuffed in the drain in the center of the chamber, blocking it and allowing 4 inches of water to accumulate the ground. Precisely how much water on the floor was actually blood was never determined. All 4 surviving test subjects also had large portions of muscle and skin torn away from their bodies. The destruction of the flesh and exposed bone on their fingertips indicated that the wounds were inflicted by hand, not with teeth, as the researchers intently thought. Closer examination of the position and angles of the wounds indicated that most, if not all of them, were self-inflicted. The abdominal organs below the ribcage of all 4 test subjects had been removed, while the lung, heart, and diaphragm remained in place. Skin and most of the muscles attached to the ribs had been ripped off. exposing the lungs through the ribcage. All the blood vessels and organs remained intact, but had been taken out and laid on the floor, fanning out around the asphyxiated area, but still living bodies of the subjects. The digestive tract of all four could be seen to be working, digesting food. It became apparent that what they were eating and digesting was their own flesh that they had ripped off and eaten over the course of days. Most of the soldiers were Russian specialized operatives at the facility. Still, many refused to return to the chamber to remove the test subjects. The subjects themselves continued to scream to be left in the chamber, begged and demanded that the gas would be turned back on once they fall asleep. To everyone's surprise, the test subjects put up a fierce fight in the process of being removed from the chamber. One of the Russian soldiers died from having his throat ripped out, and another gravely injured by having his testicles ripped off and an artery in his leg severely injured by one of the subject's teeth. Another of the 5 soldiers lost their lives, not the ones that committed suicide in the weeks following the incident. In the struggle, one of the 4 living soldiers had his spleen rupture and bled out almost immediately. The medical researchers attempted to sedate him, but this proved impossible. He was injected with more than 10 times the human dose of morphine dephrine, and still fought like a cornered animal, breaking the ribs and arm of one of the doctors. His heart was seen to beat for a full 2 minutes after he had bled out, to the point there was more air in his vascular system than blood. Even after it stopped, he continued to scream and flare for another 3 minutes, struggling to attack anyone in reach and just repeating the word more and more, over and over, weaker and weaker, until he finally fell silent. The surviving 3 test subjects were heavily restrained and moved to a medical facility. The 2 with intact vocal cords continued begging for the gas, demanding to be kept awake. The most injured of the 3 was taken to the only surgical operating room that the facility had. In the process, finding the subject to have his organs placed back within his body. It was found that he was effectively immune to the sedative that they had given him to prepare for the surgery. He fought ferociously against his restraints when an anesthetic gas was brought out to put him under. He managed to tear most of the way through a 4-inch wide leather strap on one wrist, even though the weight of a 200-pound soldier was holding that wrist. It took only a little acetine than normal to put him under. The instant his eyelids fluttered and closed, his heart stopped. In the autopsy of the test subject that died on the operating table, it was found that his blood had tripled the normal amount of oxygen. The muscles were still attached to his skeleton but badly torn, and he had broken 9 bones in his struggle to not be subdued. Most of them were found from the force of his own muscles exerted on them. The second survivor had been the first of the group of the 5 to start screaming. His vocal cords were destroyed. He was unable to beg or object to surgery, and he only reacted by shaking his hand violently in disapproval when the anesthetic gas was brought near him. He shook his head yes, when someone suggested reluctantly that they should use the surgery without the anesthetic. He did not react for the entire 6-hour procedure, placing his abdominal organs and attempting to cover them with what remained of his skin. The surgeon persistently stated repeatedly it should not be medically possible for the patient to still be alive. One terrifying nurse assisting the surgery stated that she had seen the patient's mouth curl into a smile several times whenever his eyes met hers. When the surgery ended, the subject looked at the surgeon and began to wheeze loudly, attempting to talk while struggling. Assuming this must be something of dire importance, the surgeon had a pen and pad fetched so the patient could write his message, and it was simple: keep cutting. The other 2 test subjects were given the same surgery, both anesthetic as well, although they had to be injected with a paralytic for the duration of the operation. The surgeon found it impossible to perform the operation while the patients laughed continuously. Once paralyzed, the subjects could only follow the attending researcher with their eyes. The paralytic cleared their system in the abdominal short period of time, and they were soon trying to escape their bonds. The moment they could speak, they were again asking for the stimulant gas. The researchers tried, asking why they had injured themselves, why they had ripped their own guts out, and why they had wanted to give back the gas. Only one response was given: I must remain awake. All 3 subjects' restraints were reinforced, and they were placed back into the chamber, awaiting determination as to what to do with them. The researchers, facing the wrath of their military benefactors for having failed the stated goals of their project, considered euthanizing the surviving subjects. The commanding officer, an ex-KGB instead saw potential and wanted to see what would happen if they were put back on the gas. The researchers strongly objected but were overruled. In preparation of being sealed off in the chamber again, test subjects were connected to an EEG monitor and had their restraints padded for a long-term confinement. To everyone's surprise, all three stopped struggling the moment that it was let back on. It was obvious at this point, all three were putting up a great struggle to stay awake. One of the subjects that could speak was humming loudly and continuously. The mute subject was straining his legs against the leather bonds with all his might, first left, then right, then left again, with something to focus on. The remaining subject was holding his head off his pillow, blinking rapidly, having been the first to be wired to the EEG machine. Most of the researchers were monitoring their brain waves in surprise. They were normal most of the time, but sometimes flatlined exponentially. It looked like as if he was repeatedly suffering brain death before returning to normal. As they focused on paper scrolling out of the brainwave monitor, only one nurse saw the man's eyes slip shut the same moment his head hit the pillow. His brainwaves immediately changed to a deep sleep and flatline for the last time. The only remaining subject that could speak started screaming to be sealed in now. His brainwaves showed the same flat lines as the one who had just died from falling asleep. The commander gave the order to seal the chamber with both subjects inside, as well as 3 researchers. One of the named 3 immediately drew his gun and shot the commander point blank between his eyes. Then turned the gun on the mute subject and blew his brains out as well. Then he pointed the gun at the remaining subject. They were strained to a bed, as the remaining members of the medical and research team fled the room. "I won't be locked in here with these things. Not with you!" he screamed at the man strapped to the table. "What are you?" he demanded. "Have you forgotten so easily?" the subject asked. "We are you. We are the madness that lurks within you all, begging to be free at every moment in your deepest animal mind. We are what you hide in your beds every night. We are what you sedate in silence in your eyes. When you go to the nocturnal haven where we cannot thread." The researcher paused and aimed at the subject's heart and fired. The EEG flatlined as the subject weakly choked out, "So nearly free